Hi learners, again welcome back to your Philippine Politics and Governance. This is your instructor, Mr. Krippe Anthony A. Ramos. So for this session, we'll be discussing about the concept of power. So I've asked you in your Google Classroom if do you think you are powerful, or in Filipino, sa tingin niyo ba kayo makapangyarihan? So before we answer that question, let's take a look in the concept of power. So if we're talking about power, it is imperative for us to know the natures of power. So let's take a look into the four natures of power. So the first one would be the power over. So if we are pertaining to the nature of power over, this is your common connotation about power, which is you thinking that there is a domination or there's dominance of a person or a group to another person or group. So definitely you are seeing negative things because it is associated with force, threat, coercion, discrimination, corruption, and even abuse. So ito yung kapangyarihan or ito yung nature ng power na kung saan lagi nyo iniisip na merong taong nakalalamang. Okay? Meron tao or isang grupo ng tao na sila yung mas higit kesa doon sa isa. That is why it is termed power over. So over nga eh. So ibig sabihin, you are using your power into another person or group. And it is seen as negative one because of force, threat, coercion, and those negative things that are being done in order for them to dominate the group. Okay? So another nature of power would be the power to. So if you are pertaining to the power to, you are actually using the ability or you are using your ability to do something in your own resource. So say for example, if we're pertaining to power to, you might pertain to your power to think, power to react, power to say, power to use. So definitely you are utilizing your own resource. That is power to. Power with. So from the word with, of course, this is something to do with your ability to work with others. Okay, you are sharing your power. So you are cooperating with others in order for you to get your power and then apply it to another things or another concepts or another situations. Again, if you are pertaining to the power with, it is similar to power to. However, you are doing it with cooperation to another person or group. Okay. Next would be power within. If we're talking about power within, this is something to do with your self-worth and self-knowledge. Just take note that it is within. It is your power within. Power mo sa loob. So definitely, this is your sense of self-worth and self-knowledge. Okay? So those are the natures of power. Now we are through with the natures of power. Let's talk about the dimensions of power. So you might actually encounter the question, bakit kailangan mo pang tumakbo? Bakit kailangan mo pa magkaroon ng posisyon para makatulong? Or kailangan mo ba ng posisyon para makatulong? At so in that sense, class, I believe most of you will answer, hindi kailangan. Pero at some point, through these dimensions of power, I will tell you that you might need that position and power. So let's take a look. So the first dimension of power is as to the decision making. You are using your power as to the decision making. So just like what I mentioned, so say for example, you do not have any power, or if in that sense you do not have any position. If you do not have any position, definitely it will not give you power. And if you do not have power, definitely you won't be able to control or influence another person's or group. So say for example, if you are a barangay, if you're not the barangay captain, definitely the people might not honor your authority. Bakit? It's simply because you do not have the authority in the decision-making process. Okay? You will only have that decision-making right if you will have power. And in that sense, that's part of the dimension of power. Okay? You might also ask, Sir, bakit na ngayong panahon ng pandemya may mga bagay na mas inuuna? So say for example, Sir, dapat inuuna po sana yung mga solutions as to the pandemic. Pero ang inuna po nila ay yung sa ABS-CBN franchise. It is simply because of the second dimension of power, that is agenda setting. If you pertain to the agenda setting, this definitely means that you are already scrutinizing. If you have the power, you actually have the right in order for you to set what are the limitations of your meeting. So let me put it context. So say for example in Congress, so definitely those who were elected by their people in their distinct districts and even their distinct sectors for the party systems, definitely they have the power to set the agenda of their meeting that needs to be discussed. So in that sense, definitely those congressmen and those representatives, they have the right to say kung ano nga ba yung dapat na pag-usapan at yung mga bagay na hindi nila dapat pag-usapan. So in that sense, they are setting the agenda. Sila yung may kakayahan para magsabi ano yung dapat nating pag-usapan sa session na ito, ano yung dapat hindi. In that sense, that is agenda setting. Preference shaping class, if you have power, definitely you will be able to control on, or you will be able to set parameters on how will you be able to say that an individual is superior over the other. So definitely if you have power, you will be able to shape someone's beliefs, sense of self, and the acceptance of superiority or inferiority. So in this sense, these are the dimensions of power. So just like what I've asked you in your Google Classroom, are you powerful? Before answering that question, class, I would want you to take note of the basis of power. If you are asked that kind of question, you might want to ask first, what do you mean by that? Or what is the basis of power that you are referring to? So let me go ahead and discuss the basis of power. You might actually be powerful, class, if you will be able to persuade or influence others. That is referent power. So if you are good and if you have the capacity to persuade and influence other people's thinking, other people's work, definitely you possess referent power. Okay? Say for example on another basis of power, say for example you are good on something. Okay? So say for example you are good in terms of technology. So definitely you might possess the expert power because you are expert in that kind of situation. So let me give you another example. Teachers in Philippine politics and governance, we actually possess the expert power because we are deemed to be expert in terms of the subject. Okay? We were trained to have the specific skills in order for us to mold you according to the learning objectives. So that is expert power. Okay? Legitimate power is the most common power that you are pertaining or you are thinking. So ito yung kapangyarihan na kung saan a person, okay, is being held accountable or is being vested the duties and obligations within the organization. Let me give you an example. In terms of the vice presidency, the legitimate power rests to vice president. The power is vested to Vice President Leni Robredo. Okay, what does it mean? There is only one legitimate vice president. The people elected Vice President Leni Robredo to execute the duties and responsibilities of a vice president. So kahit anong gawin ng ibang tao, say for example ni Bongbong Marcos, definitely that's not legitimate power. Simply because the position and the duties was already vested to Vice President Leni Robredo through the election process. Okay? So in your classroom, so your advisor possessed the legitimate power because he or she was vested the position and duties of being an advisor to your class, same as with your class president. Okay? Next would be coercive power. If we're talking about the coercive power, this is the power holder's ability to punish or penalize others. So let me give you an example. If I am, for example, your teacher, and then suddenly I ask you to do something, and then and you did not follow my instructions, and then suddenly I told you that I will be penalizing you in the form of giving deduction into your grade, it means that I'm already exercising my coercive power. Okay? Pinaparusahan sa mga pagkakataon na hindi nagagawa yung mga bagay-bagay. Okay? Kung meron kang kakayahan para magbigay ng parusa, definitely that's coercive power. So take note, class, that this coercive power doesn't necessarily mean na ito ay puro minus points. Pwede rin say for example na merong magbibigay ng emotional na katangian. So halimbawa, masasaktan kayo sa mga sasabihin ko. So definitely, that is coercive power. You are penalizing. You are punishing. Okay? On the other hand, okay, the opposite of coercive power would be the reward power. So if you are using your reward power, definitely you have the ability to give something of value. Say, for example, money, responsibility, or praise. So let me give you an example. If your teachers, say, for example, if your teacher asks you to do something and then you were able to exceed his or her expectation, you might actually receive reward in the form of grades. You might also be able to receive it through praise. So, kaya na sinabi ko kanina, hindi siya kailangan pera lang. No? Hindi siya kailangan mabigat na bagay. Kahit yung simple pagsabi lang na, oh, ikaw, napakagaling mong bata. No? Or you're good. You keep it up. So, that's already a praise. And that praise will be able to give you the right to exercise your reward power. Okay, so again, if you are asked if you are powerful, definitely you might want to ask first, what is the basis of power being referred? Okay, and take note, class, that it doesn't necessarily mean na kapag meron ka ng reward power, wala ka ng coercive power. You can actually possess all bases of power. Okay, you might be powerful in terms of referent power, expert power, legitimate power, coercive power, and reward power, depending on your characteristics. Okay, so now, let's put the context into the fundamental powers of the state. So let's take a look on what are the fundamental powers of the state. So they are actually also called as inherent because they belong to the very essence of government. Without them, no government can exist. Meaning, these powers are the very essence, and this is the reason why the government exists, class. So definitely, kapag nandyan na yung gobyerno, whether they like it or not, the fundamental powers are already present. And those are police power, power of eminent domain, and taxation power. Let's go ahead and check what are the similarities among these fundamental powers before we differentiate them from one another. First, they are inherent in the state and may be exercised by it without need of express constitutional grant. As we all know, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, meaning lahat dapat na magiging gawa ng gobyerno, lahat ng kanilang magiging action ay naaayon dapat sa Constitution. Okay? In exercising the inherent power, definitely kahit wala yung Constitution, sinasabi dyan, no? Kahit hindi babanggitin yung tatlong kapangyarihan na yun, automatic, the state may be able to exercise such inherent powers. Okay? They are also not just necessary, but also indispensable, meaning hindi mo siya matatanggal. Okay? Hindi mo siya maaalis sa gobyerno. Sa ayon sa gusto mo, pag may gobyerno, kailangan meron itong tatlong kapangyarihan niya. So just like what I've taught you in your previous session. So 'di ba sinabi ko nga, we are entering in a social contract. So nakikipag-negotiate ang tao sa gobyerno. Okay, we are entering in a social contract in which sinasabi natin na, okay, sige, in order for us na ma-attain namin yung interest namin at saka maging maayos ang lipunan namin, ibinibigay namin yung karapatan namin sa iyo. Pero sa kapalit nitong karapatan na ito, kailangan tuparin mo yung iyong obligasyon na poprotektahan mo kami. Okay? So yung pagbibigay niya ng protekta, definitely, yun na yung inherent powers na tinatawag. Okay? So let's talk about that in a bit. So let's continue first with the similarities. Third one would be they are methods by which the state interferes with private rights. So definitely, class, just like what I've mentioned, since we're entering in a social contract in which the government will ensure that our community or society will be organized, definitely there are instances wherein our private rights may be interfered. Okay? Maaari tayong mapakialaman kasi baka may mga pagkakataon na hindi na pala natin nagagawa yung dapat natin gawin at saka yung mga karapatan natin or mga ginagawa natin ay lumalabis na sa ine-expect sa atin. And in order for the state to make sure that we are organized, definitely they might interfere with our private rights through the inherent powers. However, if we are being interfered or our private rights are being interfered with the state, definitely there is an equivalent compensation. Okay? So what hindi pwedeng pag pinakialaman yung private right natin, wala tayong makuha na kapalit. Later, we'll discuss about that. And of course, these fundamental powers of the state are exercised primarily by the legislature. But there would be some instances wherein there is a valid delegation to another institution. Okay? So what are the common limitations on the fundamental powers of the state if we were able already to discuss the similarities? So let's take a look on the first one. These fundamental powers of the state may not be exercised arbitrarily to the prejudice of the Bill of Rights. So, class, to give you an insight, Article 3 of the 1987 Constitution would be your Bill of Rights. And that Bill of Rights will ensure that the government will not abuse its power. Okay? Ito ang protection natin sa ating sa ating gobyerno kasi baka may magmalabis. At para wala magmalabis sa government, definitely the Bill of Rights have been indicated in our Constitution. So let me give you an example. So under Article 3, Section 1, it states that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, and property without due process of law, nor shall any person be deprived of equal protection of laws. So ano ibig sabihin? So say for example, no, bigla ka na sasabihin ng government, papatayin kita without due process of law, na hindi ka nililigtas sa korte. Definitely, hindi pwedeng sabihin ng state na, oh, we're exercising our police power, that is valid action. Hindi pwede yun. Because under Bill of Rights, Article 3, Section 1, bawal kang pumatay nang hindi dumadaan sa proseso ng batas. Okay? So again, that might be a limitation. And of course, class, it will all the fundamental powers will be subject at all times to the limitations and requirements of the Constitution. Just like what I've mentioned earlier, the Constitution is the supreme law of the land, and this Constitution must always be followed at all times. Sa paggawa ng batas, sa paggawa ng ordinansa, dapat ito ay nasusunod. Okay? Sige. So let's now take a look on the police power. So the first inherent power of the state would be the police power. So police power is considered the most pervasive, the less limitable, and the most demanding of the three powers because it may be exercised as long as the activity or property sought to be regulated has some relevance to the public welfare. So class, if we're pertaining to police power, it is concerned with the public needs. So the public needs may be classified into four: public health, public morals, public safety, and even public welfare. So compared to the other two inherent powers, definitely it easily outpaces the other two powers. Why? Because hindi lang property ang kanya naapektuhan, kundi liberty of persons. Okay? So sinabi rin dyan kanina that if we're pertaining to police power, definitely it is less limitable because it is concerned with the public welfare, to the common good, okay? To the general welfare. So for as long as meron itong epekto sa public needs natin, definitely that is police power. Okay? So, let me give you an example. So, under police power class, say for example, may isa tayong classmate. Yung classmate na ito ay sobrang excited niya, nagpatayo siya ng building. Okay? So, nagpatayo siya ng building na malapit sa may highway at sa sobrang excited niya, nagpatayo siya, pero sa kasamang palad, hindi niya ito natapos kasi nagkaroon ng problema at may nakatiwangwang na mga bakal. No? May mga bakal na nakatiwangwang doon sa taas at anytime pwedeng mahulog itong bakal na ito at maaring kamatay ng taong babagsakan. Okay? If that would be the case, the government, through the local government units, okay, so say for example sa Caloocan or even in Quezon City, pwedeng yung gobyerno sabihin nila that they will be exercising the police power in order for them na ipatibag yung kanilang building. Okay? Bakit? It is simply because it is concerned with public safety. Okay? So, ipapatibag nila yan simply because ayaw nilang may mapahamak na ibang tao. Okay? And in that sense, they will be able to exercise police power. Okay? Let me give you another example. Say for example, meron naman tayong classmate na nakatira siya sa isang compound na maraming bahay na magkakasama. And then suddenly, napagdesisyonan niya na mag-aalaga siya ng baboy. At alam natin na in the setup ng mga bahay sa Metro Manila, it is not advisable for us na magkaroon ng babuyan sa atin kasi makaka-apekto sa kalusugan natin. Say for example, yung amoy niya, at hindi siya healthy for us. So definitely in that sense, our public health will be affected. And in that sense, pwedeng kunin yung baboy. Okay? So, sir, you've mentioned earlier that if our private rights will be interfered, that there would be a compensation. May matatanggap po ba kaming pera, may matatanggap po bang kaming kapalit, pagkain po siguro, kung halimbawa po tinubag yung building kanina or kinuha yung baboy? So the answer would actually be there would be no financial compensation. Walang perang ibibigay, walang food na ibibigay unfortunately. Bakit? Kasi ang iniisip na compensation dito ay yung ikabubuti ng mamamayang Pilipino o yung ibang mga tao na kabubuti para sa lahat. And in that sense, it is already the compensation that is being provided for us. Okay? Na pag tinanggal namin itong building na ito, lahat tayo makikinabang kasi tayo ay ligtas. Or pag tinanggal itong baboy na ito, lahat tayo ay magiging malusog kasi wala tayong maamoy na mabaho. So definitely that is police power. Okay? So let's now take a look into the power of eminent domain. So class, the power of eminent domain would be the power of the state to forcibly acquire the needed property in order to devote it to the intended public use upon payment of just compensation. So in that definition class, I would want you to remember 4 conditions in exercising the power of eminent domain. The first one, there would be the taking of private property. Second, the private property will be turned into public use. Third, if you will be taking the private property for public use, there must be just compensation. And then fourth, there should be the observance of due process. In order for the state to validly undertake the power of eminent domain, definitely 4 conditions must be present. Okay? So let me give you an example. Say for example, si Sir Krippe, no, matagal nang nakapangalan sa akin ang lupa na nasa gitna ng Trinoma and ng SM North EDSA. Okay? Panahon pa halimbawa ng lola ko. Eksakto na I have my mansion there. Okay? So may mansion ako sa may gitna ng Trinoma at saka ng SM North. And then suddenly, just like what we know, MRT7 has been proposed and has been approved. No? Saktong tatamaan yung mansion ni Sir Krippe in that sense. Ano mangyayari? So I have my private property. So if the state is thinking that this would be beneficial for all and it's for the general welfare para mapadali yung transportation, definitely they can undertake my private property. Okay? So pero in order for it to be a valid exercise of power of eminent domain, there should be a public use intention. So kailangan para ito sa publiko. And in that sense, para yun sa MRT7. So 2 conditions are already present. However, since ito nga ay hindi ko naman kasalanan, no? Hindi ko siya kasalanan na magpapatayo pala yung government, definitely there would be a just compensation. Okay? That is based the fair market value. Pag-uusapan yan. Okay? Pag-aagrihan yan ng dalawang parties, ako halimbawa at saka yung government, o magkano yung ibibigay. So definitely mapagkakasunduan yan. If hindi man magkasundo, the court will actually determine the compensation that will be given to me as the owner of the private property. And of course, there should be an observance of due process. Okay? Dapat naayon sa batas, okay? Yung pag-undertake ng private property. Kasi kung hindi masusunod yung mga alintunin ng batas, definitely there would be questions. Okay? So, taxation power class. So, taxation power class is the process, or taxation is the process by which the government through its legislative branch imposes and collects revenues to defray the necessary expenses of the government and to be able to carry out, in particular, any and all projects that are supposed to be for the common good. Simply put, taxation is the method by which these contributions are exacted. So class, you might actually ask, sir, why do we need this power, the taxation power, or why do we give the government the power to tax? Kasi nakapagpahirap lang po ito. So, class, you take note that taxes are the bloodline of the government. Okay? Without such tax, definitely there would be no programs or no projects that are to be undertaken by the government. Bakit? Of course, definitely itong mga tax na ito ay gagamitin for us, no, para magawa yung programs at projects. Without money or without these taxes, walang pagkukunan yung government ng budget. Okay? So, taxes are enforced proportional contributions from persons and property. Okay? So, again, this is enforced proportional contributions. This is also levied by the state by virtue of its sovereignty. It is for the support of government and, of course, for public needs. Without these taxes, again, class, let me repeat it, definitely there would be no programs and no projects that are to be carried out. Why? Simply because the taxes are the bloodline of the government. Dito sila kumukuha ng pambigay nila sa kanilang programa at proyekto. So say for example, of course, kaya meron na ibibigay yung government na ayuda in social amelioration programs. Say for example, it's because may tax ang pinagkukunan. Okay? So without these taxes, definitely hindi mag-carry out yung project. So I've summarized the inherent powers of the state through this table. So let's have a look into the basis of these powers. So if we're talking about in extent of power, hanggang saan no, na ilalapat itong mga kapangyarihan na ito, looking into the police power, it extends to the liberty and property rights. Okay? A person may be put into bars should it pose a danger and threat to the common good. Okay? So say for example, kung nakikita niya halimbawa yung tao no na nakamamatay halimbawa or nag-i-impose ng threat, no? Say for example, ako halimbawa tapos nakita halimbawa na meron akong kutsilyo at bigla ako nananakot na sasaksak ko ng ibang tao, definitely pwede akong makulong through police power. Because definitely, pag kinulong ako, ang tinitignan na compensation, magiging matiwasay ang paligid. Okay? Of course, the property may be destroyed also if it endangers the general welfare. Just like yung sinabi ko kanina, no, yung building na maaring makamatay dahil dun sa mga bakal at saka dun sa baboy na makakasama sa kalusugan ng tao. Okay? Whereas, if we're talking about taxation power, definitely, property rights is solely affected, unlike police power. And also, the same is expected to the power of eminent domain. Okay? If we're now looking into the power exercise, kung sino ba ang naglalapat ng kapangyarihan na ito, definitely, if we're talking about police power, the government is the one exercising the police power. Government is also exercising the taxation power. However, okay, government and any private entities, okay, and a private entity may actually exercise the power of eminent domain for as long as it is for public use. Okay, so let's go to the purpose. Lastly, so the purpose of police power, the property is being destroyed in order for us to eliminate the threats to the general welfare. Okay? Kaya natin ito sinisira, kaya natin siya kinukulong simply because gusto natin na mabuti yung ating kalagayan. Okay? Bilang isang lipunan for the general welfare, for the common good. Next would be the taxation power. So the purpose of taxation power, of course, taxes are being collected for public use. Okay? At hindi yan dapat sa bulsa ng ilan. That supposedly be used for public use. Okay? And of course, power of eminent domain, just like what I mentioned earlier, that's part of the condition. Private properties are taken to convert, okay, or they are being converted or taken in order for it to be used for public use. Okay? And those are the inherent powers of the state. Okay, and that would be all for this session. Let me thank you for attending and for watching this session. And I hope to see you in the coming and succeeding sessions. Thank you, everyone.